to make sense of this, I think we need to ask the question, this has been cast as regulation, but I really think it's government policy makers more generally. It's not just regulators, it's central banks, it's finance ministries, it's people that are concerned about consumer outcomes wherever they are in government that find this important, law enforcement as well. Why are governments actually interested in this cryptocurrency space? And I think the answer looks very familiar to traditional financial services. Potentially down the line, there are issues around financial stability if this technology grows. My personal view, and it's shared by a lot of central bankers around the world, is that we're probably 3 orders of magnitude in market size away from needing to worry about that at all, but it does pose a lot of interesting questions down the line. If a cryptocurrency becomes systemically important, well, who do you designate as the overseer of it? And then 2 issues that we'll focus on today, the first one of which is going to be consumer impact. That has a number of dimensions. How are consumers adequately protected? How are they adequately informed? On the positive side, what is the potential of this technology to offer greater choice and better value to consumers? And that's going to be the sort of the first thing we discuss in this session. And then secondly, clearly this technology does raise a lot of issues. We heard about some of them in the last session around anti-money laundering, economic sanctions, prevention of financial crime. There are some clear and present issues, and there are also some really interesting issues about how the technology works. And I think there is a common theme here, which is we don't have a good model for how we deal with the public policy issues around sort of financial transactions that don't have a central gatekeeper, especially when those are electronic and can get around the world. We need a new paradigm on all of these issues. And my bias, I was told that one of the things I have to do here is declare my bias up front, is that actually there's a lot more common ground and common interest between the policymakers and the innovators than people have generally allowed for in this area. A lot of the innovators actually want stable solutions that protect consumers. They want consumers to be able to trust in the products and services that they are offering. And I mean, I think there are clearly people in the cryptocurrency community that don't agree with that. There are people that are anarchist, there are people that are anti-government or distrustful of government, and it's probably harder for people like that to build a consensus with people like Anne, but there is a large chunk of the community that where I think the consensus is a little easier than people are assuming, and we're hoping to tease that out. Finally, and then before I sort of let everyone else talk, we talked about this a little for those of you that were in the last session, but just what are we talking about here? We hear cryptocurrency, virtual currency, digital currency, math-based currency. I think different people define these in different ways. So just on the slide that we should have up on a number of these screens, we're in the bottom left-hand corner of this. We're talking about decentralized and distributed protocols without a sort of single point of failure or a single point of being able to extract economic rent above and beyond sort of what the market might suggest. And we're talking about currencies and payment systems that are in effect convertible to other currencies. That raises a lot more issues, and we're talking about ones where users can connect directly, that unlike almost anything else in the world of non-cash payments, you can actually send value from one person to another without going through an intermediate financial institution.
Thank you. I hope you are able to hear me in Boston. Greetings from London. I can only hear you through the loudspeaker actually in the room, and then through the microphone in your room via Skype. So if I missed some nuances of what you said, then I apologize. You asked me for the risks that we've identified. We've identified quite a number of risks, more than 70. of them. And that was not an excuse trying to find a reason why virtual currencies ought to be regulated. But what we have an interest in as a regulator is that if there are innovations in a market like virtual currencies, that all the participants that operate in that market can have confidence in it. Because one of the worst case scenarios for us would be if there are 2, 3, 4 major scandals in that market that then shuts the market down completely. For that reason, we have to identify the risks, because we have to take measures in order to mitigate the risks and the risk drivers. I don't want to bore you with any of the 70 risks at great length, but I just want to probably highlight a single one. And that is the fact that, of course, many of the risks of virtual currencies are very, very similar to other types of payment systems, payment schemes, and hence probably require a similar regulatory response. But there's one aspect of virtual currencies that is distinct from other payment schemes, and I'm quite keen to hear what audience participants or other panelists, what their views are, and that is the fact that virtual currency schemes cannot only be anonymously created by anyone, but they can also subsequently be changed. Their functioning, the way they operate, can subsequently be altered through the scenario of 51% of the computational power being held in the hands of one individual or one pool of miners, who are then in a position to change the functioning of the scheme, to block transactions. So if I may use a probably imperfect but still valid analogy, that would be, if I'm right in interpreting it, right the same as I hold dollars or euros or British pounds in my jacket pocket, and overnight I realize that I won't be able to use those particular notes anymore, because the majority of other euro or pound or dollar holders in the world has decided that I can't use them anymore, and I'm blocked from transactions. So as a regulator, and that creates lots of risks, not only to consumers, but to merchants, to other actors in that scheme, investors in that scheme. So I wonder how that risk is ought to be addressed, because as a regulator, it is not a comfortable position to be in, to be looking at a scheme, a payment scheme, where suddenly the core functionality can be changed and taken away.
Yeah, I think overall we're about 3 or 4 years out on that, but Sean Neville and Circle have done a great job in making their applications user-friendly, bringing things closer to the point where Sean's sister can use it. The user-friendly nature of applications for Bitcoin is a very important ingredient. There are many smart developers. There's a lot of VC money going into this and to solve this problem. I think it's probably the number one barrier to massive adoption is the user-friendly nature. We already have demonstrated the market-based legitimacy. When you look at the user-friendly applications, though, and those starting to roll out, we should be getting to a point, we should aim to get to a point for where it's as easy to download as it is to download Skype and start using Skype. I'm sure Sean's sister can use Skype. Many people can download and use Skype. And we're making progress to getting to that point for Bitcoin.
Oh, certainly, Adam. But before I get into the risks, I think that I'd like to emphasize that certainly from a policy perspective, we're taking a very holistic approach. We're very appreciative of the potential benefits and are very supportive of financial innovation, especially as it relates to financial inclusion. At the same time, my office at Treasury, the Office of Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes, which is a policy shop under a larger shop that also includes the regulator, FinCEN, as well as OFAC, the sanctions enforcement body, is charged with identifying systemic vulnerabilities both in the U.S. financial system and the global financial system, and developing policies and strategies to address them. And so new payment mechanisms, products and services, is something that we are always looking at, and we take a very systemic long-range look, but also immediately our current anti-money laundering terrorist financing laws do apply to money transmitters. We are very much interested in the issue of sanctions evasion, and to the extent that you hear people talking about a potential benefit of a decentralized virtual currency being the evasion of sanctions, that's obviously of significant concern both to Dirk and to us. And so the current as well as future money laundering possibilities are very much on our radar. The other thing is that the percentage of the issue of kind of overall global transfers and the proportion of those that may be illicit, it may be small, but it is extremely important to be able to look at them and develop safeguards, because to the extent that we develop and are implementing safeguards in the formal systems that currently are regulated, we don't want to see a vulnerability, a gap where illicit flows can then move.
There's ways to go, I think, from an iteration, from a rule perspective. But again, putting it all in perspective, we're just 12, 18 months past the start of the growth of this industry, or the start of this industry.
Here, we've got a decentralized system, which, as we just heard, was a lot of the public policy benefit, and it doesn't work. We don't have, at the moment, good decentralized identity tools. So even if all the companies like Circle and Coinbase and Bitstamp and all the others got together, a lot of the transactions just don't involve one of them and involve someone with an independent wallet.
Well, I mean, I think it already is working. You're seeing accounts with the companies that Barry's mentioned, Coinbase, Circle. The KYC is functioning as intended there. You can't have a Coinbase account unless you have a bank account to be able to go through, and your bank does the KYC portion of that, so they assume the responsibility there. What I would be worried about, though, if I were on the policy side, not the innovator side, is I would be worried about what this posture is ultimately doing to the companies that are in the Bitcoin ecosystem, because less than 2% of all Bitcoin trading volume takes place in the United States. That's an astonishing statistic when you consider that most of the enthusiasts in venture capital comes from the US, but less than 2% of the trading volume occurs here. So when you hear policymakers saying, well, why is all this happening in Bulgaria and Hong Kong and China? The reason is because it's not an attractive jurisdiction in the United States. And they're not making themselves an attractive jurisdiction. They're not really trying to make themselves an attractive jurisdiction. And as a result, you have people around the world who want to trade Bitcoin, including Americans, venturing out to other countries and opening accounts, probably for the first time ever in their life.
One point I would make, and reiterate what John said, this is global, and the industry is not waiting. And I've invested in 40 companies now in India and Philippines and Mexico, and there are now pockets of real enthusiasm and innovation going on. And so I do share John's concern that we just have to, regulators and policymakers have to take a thoughtful, balanced approach. But Bitcoin it's growing really fast right now.
While jurisdictions are just beginning to understand decentralized virtual currency, I think that it is not realistic to think that there won't be thoughtful, risk-based regulatory response around the world. I think that Dirk is already in the vanguard with that in the EBA, and the task force report's recommendation with respect to AML CFT.
This is happening, and I think maybe the shoe is completely on the other foot. I'm a technologist. I've been in telecom for a very long time, and it reminds me completely, I think it was Chris Skinner who said this morning, about what happened when TCP/IP came on board. It's exactly the same. I mean, I was in the telecom industry when the dominant platform and protocol was ATM, not your ATM, but the telecom ATM, asynchronous transfer mode. And all these big telco players like Alcatel-Lucent, etc., were building big stuff to run on ATM. And I was this little nerd in the basement, discovering World Wide Web on TCP/IP. And I remember my boss coming into my office and saying, you gotta stop working on this thing because it will never fly. We've already adopted a standard, and it's ATM. You know, this whole World Wide Web thing is not going to take off. And that's the moment that I quit my job and became an entrepreneur. But if you look at TCP/IP, the reason the telcos hated TCP/IP is nobody really designed it to do this stuff. Nobody was in charge. There was no boss. And I think this is exactly what we're seeing here. The reason why so many people in this audience feel weird about cryptocurrencies is because the banks didn't invent it. You still have people in this world who think the web was a horrible idea. You still have people in the world who think the internet is completely the dumbest thing we've ever done as humanity, because there are a lot of pictures of cats on the internet, because YouTube is full of cats, and actually one of the most popular people on Twitter is Grumpy Cat, who has millions of followers. But I think that is besides the point. The fact that we're living through something that is revolutionary, that didn't come from the banks, is really scary for you. One of my favorite companies in the world is 23andMe. It's a magnificent company where you can basically have your DNA profile analyzed. You spit into a test tube, and this is one of the hardest things I've ever done. It took me more than half an hour to fill an entire test tube with saliva. But after you do that, you send it in, and 3 weeks later, they give you a complete DNA profile, and they tell you what your history is, what your current situation is, and what your likelihood to get diseases is at a certain moment in time. That is one of the scariest things in the world. 1.2 million Americans have done that, and in December of last year, they got a letter from the FDA saying their product is illegal. And when you ask the FDA why, it's not because of the quality of the test. The quality of the DNA analysis is perfect. But FDA said the world isn't ready for people to have access to this kind of technology. They closed down the shop because the FDA said if we give people access to their DNA profile, this is going to disrupt the entire healthcare insurance business, and this is not what we want to do. Regulators today, I think, are having a completely wrong approach. And if you talk to the people at 23andMe, what is beautiful there is they said, this is for us an opportunity to actually help the regulators. This is an opportunity maybe to educate the regulators. And I think we haven't seen the end of the discussion. I think it's just the beginning.